Despite what you might have been told, Mary I actually did love her sister Elizabeth. Following baby Elizabeth's birth, Mary I was quickly made illegitimate. She was no longer to be referred to as Princess Mary, she was henceforth a bastard and to be known as the Lady Mary. Given all that, it is fair to assume that of course she would resent her little sister. Mary was put in Elizabeth's household to serve her as basically a maid. This was to establish a very clear hierarchy where Elizabeth was the princess and Mary was just her servant. To begin with, Mary was of course very defiant about having to serve her replacement, and she spent days locked in her room crying uncontrollably. But despite her initial reaction, there is lots of evidence to suggest that in that time the sisters grew really close. However, Mary was supposed to be referring to Elizabeth as princess, which she blatantly refused, and instead she just called her sister. Mary was a good 17 years older than her half-sister, and therefore, of course, a sort of motherly, maternal instinct kicked in. Especially when baby Elizabeth's mother was then beheaded by their father, and Mary was able to sympathize with her sister even more, both of them having suffered at their father's hand. So then, why is it so heavily suggested that Mary hated Elizabeth? Propaganda. For years, they had been just the two discarded daughters of Henry VIII. They had formed a sisterly relationship despite their religious upbringing, Mary having been brought up a staunch Catholic and Elizabeth having been brought up a Protestant. But as soon as Mary I became queen, there was a clear distinction between the two. And this was pushed by outside sources, nobles of the court who wanted to replace Mary with a Protestant alternative, either Jane Grey or Elizabeth I. Rebellions then started in Elizabeth's name, and of course Mary felt threatened. And Mary's council even pushed Mary to execute Elizabeth, which of course we know she never did, although she did toy with the idea of potentially removing Elizabeth from the line of succession. But Mary, being a sucker for what was right, she kept Elizabeth in the line of succession as her father Henry VIII had wanted it, despite the fact that she never had an heir of her own, which of course meant that once she died, the country would return to Protestantism. And Mary was well aware of this, and still she never went so far as to actually executing Elizabeth, which she could have done quite easily, or marrying her off and shipping her to another country, which she could have done as well. All in all, it boils down to the fact that Mary loved her sister Elizabeth. She would have never executed her own half-sister, and when she died, she allowed her to take the throne without protest, knowing full well that Protestantism would take over England. And we all know how much her religion meant to Mary, which just proves to me that for Mary, family trumped religion, which is a huge, big deal in the Tudor era. And if you want to find out more, you should read my book, The Saddest Princess.